Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our conversation this month on Ideas Plus Action, the Inclusive Innovation Economy. My name is Malia Lazu, and I'm a lecturer here at Sloan and have been organizing these conversations for us over the past year. And it's great to have you all join us. This month, we are talking about the creative economy. The culture and creative economy represents an important aspect of our global economy, generating approximately 2.25 trillion in revenue and employing some 30 million people. In 2022, G20 leaders pledged 2.3 trillion to support this aspect of world industries. So today we're going to be exploring what exactly comprises the cultural economy and how can we ensure that diverse artists and makers are included and able to take advantage of this new support. Our panelists today are going to help us understand how the creative economy looks on the ground and in real life. And we're going to ask this question of not only how can we be included, but what are the models that help center the artist and the maker? It is my honor to introduce our guest today. Our first guest, Sabrina Chaudhry, is a marketing maven and experience enthusiast. She is the co-founder of Stay Silent PVD, an experience and creative agency based in Providence. She has been a defining voice of New England's diasporic and hip hop communities since 2012. Through her digital marketing work, she has worked with brands and artists such as Viacom's BET Music Matters, DJ Paul of 36 Mafia, and more to build and maintain unique online brands. She has also co-produced some of the most coveted events in the Northeast region, including Day Trail, Eggs Easy, and Homegrown New England. As a co-founder of Trade Pop-Up, a nonprofit rotating gallery and retail event experience, she has provided a collaborative space for artists and small businesses to engage in local communities. And in January 2020, she opened Crib, a live music venue and bar in Rhode Island. Sabrina, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be speaking today.
And our next guest is Halim Flowers, an artist, writer, and activist. In 1997, Halim was arrested at the age of 16 and sentenced to 2 life sentences in the District of Columbia. His experiences were filmed in the Emmy Award-winning documentary Thug Life in DC. And in 2005, he started his own publishing company, Sato Communications, through which he's published 11 books. In 2019, Halim was released from prison after serving 22 years. And upon his release, Halim was awarded the Halcyon, you're going to have to tell me how to say that, Halim Arts Lab and Echoing Green Fellowship. And in 2022, he signed to be represented by Stella Jones and DTR Modern Galleries for his visual art practice. Halim, it is an honor to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on your platform today. I look forward to sharing my journey.
And we're looking forward to hearing it. Sabrina, let's start with you. Tell us about your journey and how you got started in really building this local ecosystem. I know we first got connected because I was having a blast at Day Trail, and it was an honor to meet you. But so can you just talk a little bit about how you got engaged in this ecosystem?
Yeah, for sure. Again, thank you, Malia. I'm really excited to be speaking today. Really honored to be alongside Halim. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. So when I heard about the concept of like the creative economy or like this ecosystem, I needed to kind of take a step back and define what an ecosystem is to me. And for the way that I think about an ecosystem, it's about people with similar ideals, goals, and perspectives in many different roles that can work together to create an infrastructure that makes a sustainable system. So like, I think it's about this widespread net where different pieces are working together for sustainability. And when I think about an ecosystem, sustainability is like the central point, right? You can't have this ecosystem without there being a flow and this need for each of us to be each other's crutches at different points. And so, yeah, so Stay Silent was founded in 2012 by myself and my partner, Jason Almeida. And we were fresh out of college. We had gone to the University of Rhode Island, predominantly white institution. And as undergrads on campus, we definitely recognized that in a microcosm way, we were coming up against a lot of the same systemic issues that we would face in the real world on campus as young students of color that were trying to just put together programming for partners like ourselves, for students like ourselves. And so when we graduated in 2012, hip hop was being presented in pretty singular forms in New England, not just in Providence, but Providence and Boston. And specifically, like we had business casual nightclubs. That's been like a whole thing where it's like we all were in suits and hard bottom shoes, and it was like from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. or the rare like touring concert. We're really the only spaces outside of like, you know, underground, not necessarily like established programming. And so the reality for us was we were 23. We came up in the blog era. We were able to really find like-minded communities online, and it gave Jay and I a perspective and an understanding that there was really fertile ground that we could create a cultural hub for ourselves in Providence. And we didn't have to leave to make what we wanted happen. And I think graduating, we both were in kind of more creative fields, and it felt like if we want to get our dream job, we want to work for Def Jam, we want to work for Complex, we want to do all of this like creative work, that we have to leave where we're at in order to do that. And I think because of just the timing, really good timing, and an awareness that like, just because something isn't happening here in the way we want it to, doesn't mean it can't. We started hosting events, and we had thrown events for 5 or 6 years outside of Stay Silent. And so it just felt like a natural way to kind of move forward. And so in 2012, we started Stay Silent, hosting, specifically trying to bring hip hop into incongruent spaces for the time. So our first event was a Rockefeller Records themed art gallery. And it was just like about bringing music that we listen to and our friends into spaces in Providence where it felt like we really weren't being thought of in the programming realm. And, you know, that's the beginning portion of how we got started.
It's such a great story because it is this innovation, right? We need to create the things that we don't have. We need to create the protections from the, you know, racism and biases of, you know, American life. And, you know, the work that you guys do in Providence is such a great example of that. You know, Halim, I feel like your story starts with, you know, in MIT, we talk about lost Einsteins, right? And this idea of who doesn't get to come into these halls, right? Who doesn't get to walk in. And a lot of times it's because they, you know, it is talent that's lost, you know, to us because of how America handles poverty and violence. And I feel like, you know, your story is so reflective of that, and what a blessing it is for us to not have totally lost you. On behalf of American society, I also want to apologize for the 22 years that you did have to serve. But could you just talk to us about this amazing journey and how you were able to get into the high arts? I mean, your art is incredible, but more importantly, you're being represented, right? You know, you've made it and made it. So can you just tell us a little bit about how all that happened?
For me, it kind of goes back to what Sabrina said. I'm a huge Jay-Z fan, so you know, Rockefeller Records, and Jay-Z started rapping about Basquiat and other artists. And in prison, we didn't have access to the internet and social media. So I had a daily routine that was kind of obsessive in studying the Wall Street Journal. And the Wall Street Journal did an article on Jean-Michel Basquiat. And it didn't have a picture of any of his work, it just had a picture of him. And I saw someone who looked like me, right? And then from that point on, I started to read the other articles about other artists like Picasso and Rembrandt and Rothko and Koons. And I told myself, once I realized, because we're speaking about the creative economy, I realized that the economy is creative. And
Mm,
us as Black or people of color, we have no frame of reference on how wealth and assets are created. So through me studying Jay-Z and studying the fine art industry, I saw that upon my release, it would be an opportunity for me to get out and to create paintings, right? And these paintings can become heirlooms and they can become intergenerational assets, and they can become a way for me, especially once I study the art insurance industry, that once I can get accepted, and I've always believed that if I can overcome 2 life sentences from the most powerful government in the world, that I can do anything. So I believe that I could get out. I believe that I can create these heirlooms, these assets that we know to be paintings, and that I can, through developing my brand, I can create my own economy, whereas though that I can really inflate the value of these assets that I'm creating and put insurance policies on them to inflate my network and to monetize those insurance policies, through the success of me selling art in galleries and exhibiting at museums throughout the world. So I think where we as a people of color, what hurts us the most in the creative economy is that we begin not knowing that the economy, the money supply, is a created thing. And we, by us not having any frame of reference, even though we have the talent, we enter these markets with our talent, and we don't have any social capital to the people who monetize talent in the fine art world. So we have no social capital with the museum directors and curators, the galleries, the dealers, the collectors, right? So for me, being in prison and studying the Wall Street Journal, I had a heads up, because this is all that I studied, because I realized that just like Kyle Rittenhouse, I wasn't in prison because I was a criminal. I was in prison either because of my race or my class, and or both. And this thing about the super predator, violent child, as we saw in the case with Kyle Rittenhouse and others like him, if you had the right race or class or the support from an upper class, then you could circumvent punishment in the criminal legal system. So the entrance into the fine art world is just understanding that the creative economy is a created thing, right? And that learning how to create our own assets and how to properly value them so that we can know the difference between price and value, so that we can dictate the value and price of our creative assets and use these assets intergenerational pieces, not only to enriching us as individuals, but I strategically place my pieces within people's homes so that later on down the line, when the assets are sold on the secondary market, so that they can become millionaires just by holding my work.
I mean, Halim, there's so much I want to pull out of that. And I see Sabrina. Sabrina and I are, nodding heavily. And I'd love to actually kick it to you, Sabrina, around this creating economy. I really feel like you and Jay also sort of inherently understood, right? Like, oh, wait, we need to make sure that we're supporting our own artistry, as Halim said, right? When Halim was getting started, were we the ones buying his first pieces, right? How do we make sure that we're creating our own economy as well as creating economy for the larger, more white mainstream economy?
Well, first of all, Halim, I rocked with you before, but now that I know you're a Hov fan, like we on the same page. And I definitely completely agree with everything that Halim said. And I think one thing that we recognized early on was that the systems of government, the systems of banking, the systems of insurance, the systems of licensing, everything is set up for the benefit of white people, and that the systems are not set up to be malleable or understand creative culture for Black and brown people. And I think we learned that early on as a company, because we would approach, so the first step of like hosting events in Providence for us was trying to lock in a venue to host us. And so from the first event that we did, we recognized all of the yellow tape. We recognized the way that we were going to be treated, the price of what it would take for us to be within these spaces. So that's like the back end side of kind of what we had to do. The first event we had, like I said, was at an art gallery. They didn't let us take anything off the walls. They didn't let us put anything on the walls. They made us put 2 or 3 easels up. We printed out some pictures of Biggs and of Hove and put them on the easels and called it an art gallery, even though in our mind and our hearts, that wasn't the full view of what we wanted to do. But we knew we need to just try it. We need to get it done. We needed our friends and family and our peers to be able to come into this space and experience what we thought. And that was the back end. And then on the front end, we were blessed, and we are blessed to have so many mentors, people of color, peers, that when they were 23, they didn't necessarily have the space to do what they wanted to do, but they continued to work within their field, and they held positions of power at different points in our journey. And as Black and brown people in positions of power, they shared that information with us. They literally gave us the keys. So I'm thinking of like a mentor named Lizzie that started in nonprofit event spaces and went to work for the city of Providence. So now when we're throwing Day Trail, she's sitting in the office with us being like, listen, they're going to tell you this, this, and this is what we need to do in order to make this happen for you. How many times we've had like peers and people on the back end really like sharing information with us, because that was the only way we were going to get through the like systemic stuff that was in the way for us. And so, you know, knowing all of that and having friends, having peers, having mentors that were really undervalued when they were working artists. Like they had to go get jobs, or they had to change up what they wanted to do. Their art became more of a side hustle. We recognize that, you know, that's a cultural thing that we're dealing with in New England. People undervalue the art that's in front of them. And we wanted to be a part of creating some type of exchange where you are going to, as a consumer, as a person in our audience, there is going to be an exchange between you and the creative experience, the event experience you're getting on the other end. And so what we did was immediately from our first event, we implemented RSVPs. We were like, you know, we didn't know it as data mining. We didn't know what was happening. We were just like, yo, how do we get people to give us something for what we're giving them, if at this point we're not sure of what that dollar amount is? And so from day zero, we have always collected RSVPs for every event. And that was really the beginning of what Stay Silent is at this point. We now have 20,000 people who have RSVP'd to events in the last 9 years. We have tons of data and information about who's coming to our events, and they're all real people that we connect with. They're our community. This is Providence, Boston, Brockton, you know, it's the whole New England region. And so we really have a way to connect with them directly. And that is exactly our business model has been. There's this exchange from our audience to receive the creative work that we're doing. We in turn provide content, we provide experiences, and there's this shared exchange that has turned into dollar amounts at different points and has gone on to fund every project that we've done, because we've been 100% self-funded. Shouts to Hope, shouts to Nip. And we've never, and I mean, I don't even say that, like, it's hard to say that with like strength, because I don't think that's sustainable, but we had to do that. And
but
I hope
ownership is key, right? I mean, in a certain way, even though this is how we do it, it also means that we end up owning 100% of it by the time it reaches its tipping point and gets interesting, right?
Yeah, the ownership point for sure. So it's that balance of like, we did attempt to get banking, we did attempt to get investment. It didn't work for a lot of reasons, but the model itself has always been this value exchange. Like Halim said, it's like, we can value what we do, we can decide what that is, and we can help kind of define what that exchange looks like with our audience. So it's been a slow build. We're at year 9 on Sunday, but it's been, you know, 2 years into owning the venue, and I'm feeling really grateful and excited about what value means for us.
That's right. That's right. And that sustainable community. You know, Halim, let's start with you in exploring. Whenever we talk about, the creative economy, the arts, however you want to slice it, I immediately get triggered because I feel like it's an economy where we're actually really visible, right? Like, there's no question who creates culture in America and then the world, right? Or even around the world, right? Bollywood, right? I mean, it's brown people, to keep it to the US, it's Black and brown people, who are creating the economy. And, yet they don't seem to get any of this upside. And, you spoke about before you even started, you sort of put things in place, right? You were like, I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman, right? To again call out hope. But you said, like, I'm not going to go down. I'm not going to be that, right? I'm going to have a business. I'm going to take this Wall Street Journal, right? And cross it with my paint. Can you, maybe dive into that a little more to really help us understand, A, why, why the exploitation happens so often, and why so few seem to be able to become a Hove, right? Become a Nipsey, become an Oprah, even, right? A Tyler Perry. Why there's so few who can end up getting into that ownership side of things.
Definitely. We exist in a time right now that's unique in world history. When you're talking about creating economy, we have this thing that we know to be decentralized autonomous organizations and cryptocurrency and tokens. So whereas though a creative person like myself can create a security, I can take this conversation and create an NFT out of it, sell it on the blockchain, and give people ownership within it. But every time that it's resold, I can get a percentage from it. So never in history have us as a people of color had the opportunity to create our own currency and create our own decentralized autonomous organization and decentralized financing to really create our own systems of governance as creatives and as people, right? And to create our own economy, our own currency, to where as though if you want to get my paintings, if you want to come to my talks, you have to do it through my currency. You have to come to the metaverse, to my museum and my gallery, and use my cryptocurrency, right? So we have this huge opportunity. And the reason why we have been exploited so much is because the alternative systems that we had in place, they were not created by us, right? So by them not being created by us and people who have connections to us, we don't understand how they work. The schools that we go to, you talk to anybody that has a master's in fine arts, they teach them everything but business. They discourage them from learning business, right? The public schools don't teach financial literacy. So people are coming out of, I know people who have doctorate degrees. They don't know the difference between a stock and a bond. They don't know what a mortgage is, right? So we have this financial illiteracy that's intergenerational. We don't have a personal relationship with the creation and transfer of assets or understanding of asset allocation, right? So we're through our illiteracy and our lack of know-how this system works, we just enter it with a talent that becomes exploited. And our frame of reference is so parochial due to intergenerational poverty that we'll look at it. I remember I was in prison, I was like, okay, Hov signed a deal with Live Nation, 360 deal, and he got like 150 million. So how everybody was looking at it on the yard, like, damn, Hov got that, Hov got that. But I was like, well, Mark Zuckerberg is worth billions, right? And Hov got 150 million. So instead of me looking at trying to connect with Hov, because he's trying to feed a whole Rock Nation off 150, 250 million, let me connect with the people who run Live Nation, right? And get an even bigger deal, or at least the same, right? So our poverty gives us a scarcity perspective and a parochial limited understanding of wealth. So we'll look at millions as if it's something, not even knowing that we come from Mansa Musa, who is the richest human being ever. right? Who had so much wealth that he gave it away, right? So
He destabilized gold for years because when he gave away so much gold that it actually destabilized the price. Thank you so much for bringing him up. He's a great reference for Sloan. You talk about a true compassionate capitalist, right?
yeah, so that's all just a lot going back to a lack of understanding how to create assets and how to create systems of decentralized governments and economies and currencies. And now we at this unique opportunity in human history where everyone can get involved, right? And create their own decentralized autonomous organizations, create their own cryptocurrency and tokens, and do it legally, right? And to govern themselves and to control their own creative economy.
I love that. And Halim, thank you so much too for putting things in perspective. When you don't have much, 100,000 sounds like a lot, right? And we see that that's often what happens with, different athletes and artists that get money quickly, right? They think it's a trillion, million, zillion, right? But it's 50 million and it will run out. And, especially if you're spending $1 million a day, you're going to be out of it, before the new year, right? And more fully understanding what that money is and then what the real money is. When I had a $16 billion bank and we were a very small bank, right? And yet 16 billion seemed like a lot of money. But as we see here, we're talking trillions, right? So where's our piece of that? And the other thing I want to point out that you said is the scarcity mentality. I think that that's one of our biggest problems. And I'm so happy you brought it up. When we were doing our accelerator program for artists, one of the biggest things was understanding how to responsibly take risk, right? And because of scarcity mentality, you want to keep it in cash, you want to keep it in your mattress, right? This idea of losing something becomes paramount. And as we know with business, if you're risk averse, you're not going to be able to take those jumps. And so we actually created a session. It was like a month of our accelerator that concentrated on the trauma of money, right? And the trauma that we have. So I'm so happy you brought that up. And Sabrina, I see you wanting to jump in. Please go ahead.
Yeah, no, again, like 100% agree with the point about scarcity specifically. And I think speaking as a first generation American, like the way that my parents instilled fear of money into me from birth, I think that taking the risk of being an entrepreneur in a household where, there was a lot of need for stability, there was a lot of need for an understanding of what was coming next, how to make it work. And, I remember thinking about like what money really is, the value of money and how we're undervalued in different situations. Like I remember when Jay and I, our first project we did with a brand, they hired us as a creative agency to do a project for them. And, they offered us $28,000. And I remember like, I was so floored. I couldn't even believe like that was what they were offering us. And we accepted the project, did all the work, and ended up talking to other friends about how the same company paid a white agency over $150,000 for a project with way less deliverables. And it was absolutely insane to think about, how we really went into that situation being like, yo, we're going to make this work. And I think Jay and I took home $750 each from that $28K because it's not sustainable. It's not realistic to do full scale projects. And even the way we were working, like we just didn't even understand the value of it. So like the point of just really not knowing, because we really didn't know, we really never had anybody, like if somebody told me in college, like you're going to do a project, somebody's going to give you a $28,000 check, I would have been like, this is crazy. There's no way that happens in the world because I've never seen that much money. Like,
that's right.
And I think just having some of these conversations, even with my own family members, like with my mom, about, you know, how our business works. Every time I talk to her, she's just like, God bless you. I don't even know how it even functions. She doesn't even take a second to sit back and try to understand that this could be reality. Like, we don't have to be afraid. The most money she ever made in her whole life was $11 an hour. She retired making $11 an hour. So it's like, and that was, she fed our family. She had us all like taking care of health insurance, all the things off of $11 an hour. So when I'm talking to her, I have to understand that, like, I was raised in that. The projections of her are real and her prayers for me are real, but I have to, again, recognize that I have the power, that we have the power, and that there is this space where we do need to take ownership and make space for ourselves, especially in like owning our own and all of that. So just great points on scarcity.
And know our worth. I mean, Sabrina, that story about the 28,000, you know, versus, right? Because it actually, you didn't get paid 28,000, right? You got paid $750. And all the rest of the money, right, went to what it actually took and what it actually took to pull off to your level, right? Which I think is something else. Like, we know that anything we do has to be done twice as well. It has to look, you know, 10 times as sharp for it to be taken seriously, right? And all of this stuff. And so we end up having so many additional Black and brown taxes that go into our bag, right? That it ends up actually being less, even if it was an equal amount, right? And I think, you know, we like to pay our people, right? We don't like to exploit our partners, right? So we're not going to go in and be like, yeah, if I'm making 750, you're doing this for 500, right? We don't look at things like that. And, you know, it's really about finding that balance. Halim, what I love what you're saying too about the NFTs and us, you know, looking at how do we actually own even our own money, right? And be able to move that is, you know, this idea of what does true self-determination in capitalism look like, right? What does true ownership in capitalism look like? And I think both of you are figuring that out, right? With these models and centering Black and brown, which I think is, you know, where we often see things fall off, right? They have no problems for us being performers, right? But that ownership side, right? Halim, you owning that gallery, right? You owning those things, I think is this evolutionary step, right? That we're now taking. Before we get to the next question, I just want to, you know, throw in another. I know this wasn't in the list, but as I said, we're going to be chit-chatting. And I also want to say that we're taking questions from audience members. So if anyone has any questions, please throw them in the Q&A, and we will get to them. But I worked for Harry Belafonte for several years, and he always would say that artists are the keepers of truth, right? That one of the reasons why artists are so important is because they hold our truth, they reflect our truth, and they also bring us a future and a space that we could not imagine. You know, and I would love to, you know, just get from both of you, and Halim, why don't we start with you? You know, your idea of just the role of the artist. I mean, as we talk about value, when we're talking about our fire keepers of truth, I mean, you know, just like teachers, they should all be making more money with the importance that they have in the audience and or in our society, you know. So maybe you can help us, and Sabrina, we'll kick it to you after Halim, understand just the role and the value of artists in society.
Um, I just think we have a very limited perspective about artists. Like when Sabrina mother was cooking with that $11 an hour, she was a culinary artist, right? When we was growing up in the hood and, you know, you had to fight and people was teaching us how to box, that was martial arts, right? So it's just so much of our culture that is so artistic. And you mentioned Harry Belafonte and his ilk, they were creative people who helped one another. And me as an artist, I understand that I've never lost my childlike imagination. And that even when people reference like the founding fathers and things of that nature, this nation was a form of creativity. It was an experimentation that derived from feudalism and monarchy and, you know, fleeing religious persecution and domination of the crown and the church, and they came up with this new thing called democracy, right? And I believe they were creators. And I just think that as an artist who has an imagination and the audacity to be, and not to be compelled to uh, become a carbon copy in a world that encourages to be everyone else but your true self, that I have so much to offer in my creativity in the industries of banking and judicial and legislative and military, and it all really comes from love, right? And we look at love as like this passive, weak thing, especially if it comes from an African American man. It automatically gets it gets like it gets tagged as with Dr. King, right? And I believe love is so dynamic that it's not monolithic. But if you're an African American man, you're an artist, and they deem you to be an activist, and you speak about love, and it's like, well, this has no viability in the interest of military or law enforcement or prosecution, or all these other things that has this perception where it needs to be forced, right? And I think the artist understands love and the creativity that's used with love, and they have the audacity and the lack of fear to be love, whether it's through a song or a poem or a painting, and they encourage others to be loving in whatever industries that they find themselves being within. So I think that's the greatest responsibility of the artist is to be loved and encourage people to be loving.
Wow. Yeah,
I know we're gonna have to have like our daily Halim Flowers lesson. Like, I think Halim, this is another business like where you just record like your sayings, and then we can exactly affirmations, and then we can log in every morning and get them. Go ahead, Sabrina.
Oh, facts. I feel like there's no way to separate art from life for me. And when I think about art, I think about making. And that is just the daily act of being present, coming to where you are, showing up and making a way with everything that's in front of you. There's just the art of life. And when we're tuned into what that is, we are constantly in making, we are constantly in formation, we're constantly creating. I 100% agree with the idea that art is in all of us. There are not some specific artists. And I remember even being young, being really upset with like friends or peers that said like, I can't draw or I can't sing or I can't paint. And it's like, that's within you. Everything, we all have that. And it doesn't have to be or look or feel one way. And so for me, art encourages showing up and making with what you have. That is like the essence of it. And it is so infinite and endless, boundless. And so for me, that is the definition of art. And so what it does in our society is it provides that inspiration, that magic space of it's all within us already. We can make it work with everything that's in front of us. And that's how I like view this whole entire space.
Absolutely. And Halim, to your point too, the founding fathers were artists, right? I mean, Ben Franklin was a printer. Thomas Jefferson played the violin or viola or fiddle or whatever it was that he played, right? Paul Revere was a silversmith, right? And so even when we look at, as you said, the founding fathers, they did have this artistry, as did the mothers and the slaves who were, people who were enslaved and, creating spirituals in order to get free, right? I love that idea of creativity as the role of the artist, and something that we all have. Sabrina, I am one of those people that are like, I can't draw. So I appreciate that reminder, because I think, and again, I'm going to say, like, I look at Halim's pieces, right? And I'm like, I am so not an artist, but I don't necessarily have to be Halim, right? It's like you can do your own little artistry and be proud of it and not have to compare and contrast, the work. It might not be, what people buy from you, but it can still be a way to express your love to the world. Absolutely. All right. Well, I'm gonna answer an audience question before we jump into brainstorming on how we would spend the $2+ trillion that's supposedly coming our way. But Jessica, hey Jessica, good to know you're on this. Jessica's one of our regulars, and she actually is going to be joining us in March. So it's great to see you here, Jessica. And Jessica asks, what can we do to nurture artists of color? And Halim, I'd love to start with you, especially around the business side. I mean, I'm actually thinking now, okay, well, we're at Sloan. If artists need business classes, we got those, right? But what are some things that you think can be done from the beginning to really nurture a whole artist?
It's I like to simplify things. So I believe love is a big part of nurturing. And when you love something, it becomes easier to nurture it. So if you love an artist, sometimes it's just as simple, especially emerging artists. It's just simply it's just saying, hey, I like your work. How can I support you? And to listen to the artist instead of coming to them with preconceived answers, right? And I believe like when a human being has another human being that genuinely wants to listen to them and genuinely wants to support them, they will just the question, because education is educing, right? And educing is a bringing out, it's an distraction. So once we encounter these rare human beings that genuinely come to us, and we can feel it on a visceral level, and they ask you, how can I support you? Right? And we begin to feel comfortable conveying to them how we need our individual support as individual artists at that moment in our lives. It the question, it will induce the response, and it's our job as those who are asking the question to just listen to understand before listening to respond, and not coming to the question with preconceived ideas of, okay, this is what I need to do to help this artist because this artist is queer, or this artist is black, or this artist is this or that. Just really allow the artist to inform you on how they are comfortable being nurtured.
Go ahead, Sabrina.
Yo, I'm not even joking. I wrote down curiosity versus judgment, like when you first asked the question. And that is, I think, one of the major things that I recognized starting to take the entrepreneurial journey and like take these risks is that tough love is abundant. There's so much judgment. There's so much, what if it doesn't work? Let's play devil's advocate. Let's see like how bad it could go. Like, I feel like that was at every turn in the beginning of this process. And whether that's on the financial institution side, whether that's friends and family, it was just constant, like, tough love. And I remember really feeling like I had to take all of that criticism. I had to take all of that because I'm not weak. I'm not somebody who wants yes men. I'm not so I can take that feedback. I can handle it. And then recognizing really wholeheartedly exactly what Halim is saying, that curiosity is such a gift. When somebody approaches your process with a question, when somebody approaches your process with an explorative thought and lets you work through your own process with them as a mirror, there is no other greater form of love and of support than having that process. And I think about all the times that would have benefited me in kind of the more business structure as well. Like when I'm going in to a financial institution asking about loans, they know much better than I do the plethora of ways that they could support our business. I'm going in thinking, hey, I want to borrow something against my property I own. And they're looking at me like, okay, this is why you can't do that. Versus like, what do you need? Like, what are you actually trying to get? And then we can have a conversation. And I might not leave 20 minutes later with nothing because I wasn't asked those questions. I wasn't able to go through the process. And through curiosity, you really can see the holes in where somebody needs that filling. And so 100%, like, I think curiosity is the center point of like how we really can show up for people.
I love that. I love that. We often talk about, just the idea of being recognized, right? And like the first step of feeling that you're in a place that you belong is that you're recognized, right? Hey, Halim, how you doing? Or Halim, I didn't see you yesterday, right? It means that I see you and therefore I didn't see you or I noticed you, right? You exist in my mind. And then what I do with that. And so I want to pull out something that I think is really important when we look at changing systems, which is this idea of starting with love. I know with banking and, one of the things now with my banking clients that I work with them on is like, you sit down and you're like, okay, let me see how this person performs, right? And immediately the power dynamic, not that they're saying this, right? But it's like dance, right? Like, and you don't really know the song, right? Like, you don't really know what steps they like. You don't know if they want to see ballet or tap or jazz or Alvin Ailey, right? Like, and then you do your dance and they're like, we were looking for a ballet, but hey, thanks, right? Like, and rather than, and that's something that's steeped in institutional, systemic, right, and structural racism and bias even, right? Like this idea of performance and who has the power and who doesn't. So with our last question, I actually want to go to us talking about the money, right? Because we know, I mean, Halim and Sabrina, you brought up amazing roles, right, that artists play. I mean, I'd like to have artists in any strategy session because artists think in ways that like they'll be noticing these three things over here that you didn't even notice and they put them together and right, like they're I think architects should be in most conversations, right? Certain people think about things in ways that are beneficial to strategic planning, right? And beneficial to creating plans. So we know that 2.3 trillion is not enough. We know it's only been pledged. So, who knows what's actually going to come. But let's just, make pretend and say that, they called you, right? To be like, hey, Halim, we're doing 2.3 trillion to artists. What would be one of the first things that you would set up with that money?
First thing I would do, I would ask them to put it on the blockchain. So that way we can have true transparency. Because what ends up happening is, and I have no faith in this $2.3 trillion. Not saying that the intention isn't sincere, but the systems that we have in place, you have these gatekeepers, right? So you have these NGOs, these non-governmental organizations, and this nonprofit industrial complex, who are mostly controlled by people who are not artists, whether it's the board of directors or the chief executive officers or the other corporate officers of these NGOs and these nonprofit organizations. And they are going to be given the bulk or maybe all of the money. And by them not having an experience as creatives, they're going to create this elaborate, this complex process of receiving grants. Whereas though you're going to be so intimidated by all of this paperwork and interviewing, and then they're going to go through their own social capital network first to make sure the people that they've already been rocking with get the first dibs on these grants and stuff like this. So most of the artists that's on the ground who don't have these social connections with these NGOs or nonprofits, they're not even gonna get a chance to even apply. And even if they did, the process is gonna become so complex, right? That they're going to be intimidated from even, submitting the application. So, what I would do is first put it on a blockchain so we can see where the money is really going. And then I will have decentralized autonomous organizations that's created by global collectives of artists from different continents, countries, and regions, and allow them to govern how the money goes to artists. Because what end up happening, even as a Black artist, you have a lot of these Black gatekeepers in the art world who don't help me. They don't help me. Like people ask me, like, Black collectors, Black curators, Black artists, they have all of the connections and they don't want to help me. And they wait until white and Jewish and other non-black collectors start to support you before now you can gain entry into this elite black club, right? So all of the time it's not.
And you actually experienced that, Halim. Like they're like
Yeah, yeah.
it's just so disappointing. I needed to make sure I heard it clearly.
Yeah. Even the Uber
Because they
rich,
should be celebrate, like they should be celebrating you. I mean, you should be all over Martha's Vineyard before you're anywhere else, right?
they don't want to introduce you to Swiss Beats or Jay-Z or Diddy, who are ultra wealthy black collectors, until you give them discounts on work or free work, and it's just sickening. So a lot of times we're looking at racism, but we have interracial class elitism, and we don't help each other. So, but that's my over intellectual response to how to distribute the money. But also, I didn't want to have this talk and make it seem like it's not this interracial elite black gatekeepers that don't help, regular black creators.
That's right. No, and we need to call that out, right? Again, ecosystems need to work. It's the same thing as black cops, right? It's like we didn't fight for us to get progress, for us to then become the thing that oppresses, right? This new thing that we're trying to start here, whatever this new capitalism is going to be, is going to love black people, right? Like, not love being a black gatekeeper. I feel like that should get you shamed with wherever we're heading next, right? But I love the idea of decentralized structure. Give local people, get it down to block by block. Give like Sabrina's ecosystem in Providence, right? Could be like the decentralized ecosystem for Providence. I love that. Sabrina, again, we're talking make believe, right? If you were given access to the first crack at this 2.3, what would you do?
Yeah, I think a major thing that's coming up for me is how much unlearning I have to do around what money is. And so if I'm being completely real, it is hard for me to fathom what this money is. Like recently I sat on the COVID-19 rescue plan panel for the city of Providence. So we had $130 million that was supposed to help close the gap. It was part of the AAR. I don't remember exactly what those funds were from, but yes, the American Rescue Plan funds. And so I was like one of 4 out of like 8 people. There was like 5 of us that were people of color from City of Providence. So we sat on this panel and kind of tried to figure out what to do with this $130 million. And the way that we could not, so we were just recommending what to do with that money to the city council. So we had 10 weeks of conversations, community meetings, all the things. I thought we did all the things we could do. And in that last meeting, somebody came up and was just talking about rent relief. They were just like, yo, I just need to get the $4,000 that I owe for this rent relief. And there wasn't a straight way that anyone from the city could explain how this person could just get rent relief from this money. And so, in some of those processes, there was a developer on the panel, and the way he's like $130 million, we can't even put together a housing complex for that. And I'm sitting there like this doesn't even, I'm trying to unlearn.
You can feed generations with that, right? Like you're like, we got sustainability.
So fathoming a process in which 2.3 is even touching people that I know, like it's really hard to fathom it. And I just don't know if I really can like communicate what I would do with that, because again, with much smaller numbers, it's like we do so much with so little, and I'm trying to get out of that. I'm trying to unlearn that. I welcome more abundance for myself and for the people around me, but I really can't fathom that. And it is such an interesting process, and it brings up so much in me about how much I feel uncomfortable with this type of, like these types of things, these types of money. It just doesn't even feel real to me. Like,
and when it doesn't feel real, you can't start creating, and it's also another thing that I really appreciate, Halim, about, your suggestion, right? Which is well, if we have 7 billion people in the world and we divide, right, like there's a way to cut it up where it actually becomes bite size for the block, right? Like each block gets X, or, so that folks can actually wrap their heads around, right? And like, let's also be honest, 2.3, I mean, this money isn't real, right? And I think, Halim, that's why you bring up the blockchain, right? Because we know, right, that this money merely sits in the cloud as it gets, moved around from organization to organization or entity to entity. And, Sabrina, I think the point that you bring up, which is such a powerful point to end on, is that how much money do we actually need for self-determination? And then we can figure everything else out, right? Like I know when we run campaigns, right? And especially when I was running campaigns and we were running women or Black people, it would always be like, okay, we have to raise X amount of dollars to be viable. Now we know the white guy is going to raise, or the rich guy is going to raise more, but as long as we can get $1 million, we can get the votes we need to win. And, we see the same thing with Michelle Wu, right, being outraised, but she had enough money to be able to, run a viable campaign. And, I think this question of how do we get out of the hole so that we can then make the sky the limit, really sounds like a lot of the dance that we're doing right now. I know we're coming to time, and so I just want to thank both of you. I mean, I think your points that you have brought up around love, right, which is something we don't say a lot here at Sloan. I feel like like I'm like the hippy dippy like woo woo lecturer at MIT that's like hugging folks and all of that, but it is necessary in business for the 21st century, and especially equitable business if we mean it. I also heard you all talk about local autonomy, right, and making sure that we stay away from the institutional work but really own what we're doing. And Halim, if there is something that you've introduced that we're going to have to invite you back to talk more about, is how artists can take advantage of the blockchain and take advantage of this new type of currency that is becoming global currency, that is that is, we know, is a more trusted, right, a more transparent form of currency. And how can artists be on the front end of that and be the first movers to really own some of that economy, right? If we think about all the artists, who, if we had a chance to own our housing, right, back when there was artist housing, what we would be sitting on. And so this idea of ownership at every level down to the money, I think, Halim, is one of the most innovative ideas that we've heard from artists, or about artists and supporting artists. And so I really want to drive that home. Let's look into that. Sabrina, I see you getting off of mute. Oh,
sorry, it was by accident.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. You all can find Halim and Sabrina on all the socials. You can find their websites, and we'll also be sharing this. But I just want to thank the two of you so much. I'm not on the East Coast, and so it is very early in the morning here, and you all have made my day. I appreciate the inspiration and the love. Thank you so much. And thank you to all who's joining. We'll see you next month when we're talking about Dr. King's economy and talking to Shagun, who is our new economic development cabinet member, former leader of Black Economic Council of Massachusetts here in Boston. And we'll also be talking to Marie Francis, who's the head of Mass Budget Alliance. And she's the one who fights about getting this money to Black and brown folks rather than where our tax dollars normally go. So we will see you there. And thank you again so much. Talk to you all later. Bye.